5 steps to heal your hunger. Is your hunger broken? After years of restriction and dieting, overeating, binging, it could be very common for people to be out of touch with their hunger. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 tips on how you can reconnect with your hunger. But before we go any further, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Eve, and I love helping people make peace with food in any situation, no matter what is happening in their lives. And I just want to thank you all who subscribe to my video, to my channels. And for those of you who are watching who haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do so. And if you want, you could click that bell so you can find out when a video is uploaded, and so you never miss a tip. So, I made some notes to talk about this because I don't want you to struggle the way I had struggled, and I don't think there's anybody else out there who's talking about how to reconnect with your hunger the same way I am. So I want to give you these tips, so I tried to be as thorough as I could be. So the first question that may come up for you is, why connect with your hunger in the first place? Especially if you've been working hard to try to ignore it. Trust me, I understand. I was in the dieting boat as well. But the reason why it's problematic when you get too good at ignoring your hunger is that you have a higher likelihood of obviously getting too hungry. And if you've been following me for some time now, you know that when you get too hungry, you're more likely to overeat. Also, when you get too hungry, you're more likely to have cravings for foods that you wouldn't otherwise be eating. Also, when you get too hungry, it also impacts your mood. Imagine what your mood is like when you get too hungry, or your productivity. It could really interfere with your productivity when you experience an extreme like too much hunger or too much fullness. Also, when you get too hungry, it impairs judgment and your clarity of thought, and it just makes it hard to be your natural glowy self when you get too hungry. Another reason why it's important to learn how to feel your first sign of hunger and address it with food is because that body awareness helps you discriminate, or it helps you determine the difference between physical hunger and emotions. So people who are good at ignoring their hunger and are good at pushing that away are also people who are out of touch with other sensations that may happen in their body, such as thirst or other emotions like fear, sadness, anxiety, tiredness. It seems to get all muddled up. So it's a really important act of self-love in learning how to reconnect with your hunger. And it's important to reconnect with your physical hunger because, first of all, it helps you get back in touch with your body. And when you tune in and you're aware of what your first signs of hunger feels like, you're also able to distinguish that from other emotions that may happen. And this is so key. Also, when you get good at reconnecting with your first signs of hunger and letting yourself eat when you first get hungry, it makes it easier to stop when you get comfortably satisfied. Also, when you eat when you're first hungry, it makes it so much easier to make food choices that you feel aligned with. And finally, when you eat when you're first hungry, it keeps you out of the extremes, it keeps you away from extreme hunger. So you're more likely to be in a better mood, you're more likely to have, energy like stabilized throughout the day, because when you experience the extremes, that really puts a drain on your energy. Also, it helps you think clearly and be more focused and connected with yourself when you learn what your first sign of hunger feels like and you let yourself eat when you first get hungry. I'm sure I missed something, so if you want, you could comment below and share, when you let yourself eat when you're first hungry, when you're tuned into your body that way, what do you notice? I've even had clients tell me that when they eat when they first get hungry, that it's actually easier for them to laugh and to be their authentic natural self. So let's jump into these 5 steps. The first step is to set an intention to reconnect with your body. This is key because when you set the intention to reconnect with your body, reconnect with your hunger, and actually honor it, when those diet thoughts come in, those thoughts that tell you that you should put off your hunger or that you don't deserve to eat or, be strong and wait a little bit longer or first do these things before you're allowed to eat. I could go on and on. That when you hear those thoughts, that remind yourself of your intention to eat when you first get hungry. Also, this intention to reconnect with your body, and start becoming aware of what your first signs of hunger are, also help, because if you notice other sensations like emotions or feelings that are not physical hunger, setting the intention to determine the difference between those two. So that's why having a coach or somebody like me or a therapist could be so helpful in speeding along that work, because sometimes that could be very challenging for some people. Now, the second step is to actually look for the sensations of hunger. What do the first signs of hunger feel like in your body? Now, again, if you've ever had a history of dieting, you may have gotten really good at trying to ignore your first signs of hunger. So it might be so wild to hear me say that I actually want you to be on the lookout for your first signs of hunger. What does that feel like in your body? So some common sensations of what the first sign of hunger feel like is perhaps a slight emptiness, a slight emptiness in the body. Energy starts to dip. You may notice that you have thoughts of food, or you might have challenges concentrating. Obviously, this varies from person to person, so it's going to be very important that you learn your specific first signs of hunger. But I want you to know that once your head starts hurting, or your hands start shaking, or it feels intense, you're having pain in your stomach, or your stomach is growling really loud, oftentimes that may mean that you've waited too long. So again, I want to support you in trying to eat when you first get hungry. So the second step is to actually be on the lookout for what those first signs of hunger feel like in your body. The third tool that could be very helpful in doing this is to use a clock. And I know I've talked about this in previous videos. If you are unaware of what your hunger feels like, again, welcome to the club. You're in the right place. Using a clock could actually be very helpful. So what you do is after you have a satisfying meal, set your clock for 2 hours later. Set an alarm for 2 hours later. And when the alarm goes off in 2 hours, that's an indicator for you to check into your body. It's not an indicator for you to eat. It's just an indicator to check into your body just to see how it feels. Again, if you feel hungry before then, green light, of course I want you to eat. But that 2-hour mark is really helpful, and to check in to see how you feel. Once you check in, again, if you notice you're hungry, great, eat. If you're not yet hungry, you could set the alarm for another half hour. And when you check in half an hour later, notice how you feel in your body. And again, if you're hungry, great, go ahead and eat. And if you're not yet, you could set the clock for another half hour, and you could continue this. I just wouldn't recommend going over 4 or 5 hours without eating, because after you go 4 or 5 hours without eating, that might actually put you in the danger zone, danger of overeating or perhaps being too hungry. So I wouldn't recommend that. So if you're not quite sure if you're physically hungry, so let's say you put, at 3 hours, you're checking into your body, you think you might be getting hungry, but you're not quite sure. Again, I've been there. I've helped clients through that. Something you could do is to set the alarm for 15 minutes later, and you could check in to see how you're feeling then. So sometimes having 15-minute intervals could be very helpful. Tip number 4 is to give yourself satisfying meals. So you're feeling that experience of actually being satisfied. If you don't know what a satisfying meal is for you, or what a normal meal is, again, I have air quotes when I say normal, perhaps you could ask a friend who you identify as a normal eater to help you with this. Another thing that you could do is serve yourself a plate of food that you imagine a normal eater would eat. So if you imagine you're serving a friend or a loved one, what would you put on their plate? Another great thing that you could do is there's several resources online that talk about what a healthy plate looks like. And again, not using that as a rigid thing, but using that as a guide so that you could serve yourself enough food. And again, if you get full before the plate is finished, of course you could stop sooner. Or if you're hungry, even though you've ate everything on your plate, of course you could eat more. But getting into the practice of feeding yourself satisfying meals is crucial in doing this. The fifth step that could be very helpful is keeping a food journal. Keeping a food journal that doesn't count calories, that doesn't count points or anything like that, but a food journal that reminds you to assess your hunger before you eat. So a journal that actually asks you, okay, where am I in my hunger and fullness? So the journal that I recommend my clients keep, the first column, you put the time, like the time of day. The second column is you determine where are you in that hunger and fullness scale. Are you a 0? Are you extremely hungry? Are you a 10, totally stuffed? 5, neutral, somewhere in between there. For more tips on this, I'm going to put a link to my TEDx talk below so you can find out more about these numbers and what they mean. So before you eat, determine where are you in that hunger fullness scale. This could really help you reconnect with your body. The next line in the food journal is what food you ate. You can get as specific or non-specific as you want. And then when you're done eating, you want to reassess where you are on that hunger fullness scale. And again, this tool could be very helpful in you reconnecting with your body. If you start keeping this hunger fullness journal and you notice that you start to feel ashamed or you start to feel guilty or it makes you feel bad, I don't recommend keeping the food journal at all. It's not for everybody all the time. For some people, keeping a food journal could actually be triggering. So when you keep the food journal, you want to keep it gently. It's not a judge, it's not a police. And if you notice that you start feeling nervous about it, anxious, irritable, or it feels judgy or you feel ashamed, do not keep the food journal. And again, the journal could be very helpful in you tuning into your patterns of eating. So those are the 5 steps. I hope you found this helpful. I'd be so curious to know which step resonates the most with you, which tip is the most helpful for you, and how you plan to use this in your own life. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.